It's no secret to anyone who pays attention to the shows that Yoongi is the quieter one, the one that listens, the one that observes, the one that takes note. In light of this, it's no surprise that when anything happens within the group, Yoongi is the first one to notice and prompts the others to act in his stead. It's not that he doesn't want to help, he's just not touchy-feely like the others, and more often than not, that's all that's required to solve the problem. A hug and a few tears, some words of encouragement thrown in for good measure. Usually the task would fall to one of the matinee line, Jimin being the most likely to pick up the task. But today that led to a problem of its own. He couldn't ask Jimin to be the one to step in. Jimin was the one who was acting strangely. Yoongi couldn't quite figure out the behaviour. He had seen Jimin happy, sad, confused, nervous, and even angry, all of it in varying degrees of intensity, but this was something completely different, something far closer to deep-rooted anxiety than he had ever witnessed, something agonizingly secretive, something he couldn't put his finger on. Yoongi didn't discuss it with any of the others, he never did. It was a riddle all of his own, and it would be cheating to ask for a clue from someone else. He never admitted defeat, and at first the others didn't seem to notice. No one seemed to see how the bubbly Jimin had become quieter, smiled less often, gave less power to his practice. All his vibrant colour seemed to fade to grey over the course of just a couple of weeks, and it had Yoongi worried. He wanted to confront it, he really did. He cared about each of the members as deeply as a member of his own family, Jimin maybe a little more than the others. But with Jimin being prone to outbursts of emotion, he just didn't think he could handle it the way he needed to, terrified of making things worse. Regardless of his inaction, things did get worse. Once again, seemingly unnoticed by anyone but himself, Yoongi noticed that when devoid of his makeup, Jimin was paler and seemed thinner than usual. Not that there was anything much to his frame to begin with. His mind started to conjure images of Jimin lying in a hospital bed, sick with some terrible illness that they were too late to cure because he had never confessed, not wanting to cause the members any distress. That would be just like Jimin, to bottle everything up until it was beyond repair. He tried to shake off the haunting thoughts, but more and more he was flooded with them as he watched another week go by and Jimin's further decline. It all came to a head one Friday evening. All 7 members for a change were gathered in the living room, some watching the TV, others talking quietly amongst themselves, and Yoongi discreetly watching Jimin, who sat quietly on his own at the end of the sofa, eyes unfocused as he stared at the TV without really seeing it, his partially concealed hands picking at the bobbles on the hem of his jumper. He longed to put the sparkle back into Jimin's eyes, even if only for a second, and wandered off to the kitchen, setting about his usual routine of preparing food as an act of comfort. It was all he could think to do, and it hadn't escaped his notice that Jimin had barely eaten at dinner time, but made a show of regularly leaning across the table, only to pick up tiny amounts at a time, most of which remained on his plate when they were finished. His mind had a stranglehold on that fact. It was well known within the group that Jimin thought himself chubby a lot of the time, which couldn't have been further from the truth. Maybe a little in the beginning when they were all much younger, but not now. It was a reoccurring issue, so perhaps that was part of it, but it didn't feel like that. There was a certain mood around Jimin any time he decided not to eat, and this wasn't it. Settling back on the sofa, he held the plate out for Jimin. "You didn't eat much at dinner," he mumbled. "You must be hungry." Jimin paused, picking at his jumper sleeve, taking the plate with both hands, and Yoongi chanced to look at his face, finding it painted with a sorrowful smile. "Thanks, Hyung, that's really nice of you," Jimin mumbled in return, and though there was none of the former sparkle to it, Yoongi felt the sincerity of the words. Taking a deep breath, Yoongi decided that now was the moment. He had to speak his worries aloud, lest they eat him alive. He only hoped that if Jimin started to fall apart, one of the others would be quick to step in and do the cuddly part. "Jimin, are you all right? Recently you've seemed so far away. Jimin startled a little at the question, his body tensing slightly as he continued to stare down at the plate, the food remaining untouched. "I'm sorry, I guess I've been a little lost in my own thoughts." Yoongi didn't miss a beat, despite his own anxieties of what might happen next. What thoughts? Something happened then that Yoongi did not expect. Jimin glanced at him for a second before looking quickly away, setting the plate down on the table in front of him. "I'm tired," he stated, rather more sharply than was necessary. "I think I'll just—" He tried to rise from the sofa, but Yoongi caught his wrist, almost causing Jimin to topple back down into his seat. "Just tell me." The hushed urgency of his words caught the attention of Namjoon and Seokjin, cutting their conversation short as they turned into what was unfolding. Jimin flushed a little, noticing the unwanted attention. "It's nothing, I just want an early night," he protested, trying to pull his wrist free, but Yoongi refused to let go, some small part of him scared that if he didn't pick this apart right now, in this moment, he might never have the courage to try again. "Please," he asked, his voice remaining quiet, but by this point Hoseok had turned away from the show he had been watching, softly nudging Jungkook with his knee to capture his attention. Jungkook in turn elbowed Taeyang, leaving Yoongi and Jimin with a full audience, the TV and casual chatter long forgotten as the others tried to figure out what was happening. "Whatever this is, we can figure it out. I just need you to tell me." Jimin pulled back again, desperate to escape the prying eyes, but Yoongi held firm, knowing that in spite of all of Jimin's hard-earned muscle, there was no chance of the younger having the strength to break free of his grasp after days of barely eating. "What's going on?" Taeyang asked, his eyes flicking back and forth between the two and fixing on the grasped wrist, seemingly wanting to separate them but making no attempt to do so. Jimin's eyes fixed on Yoongi's and his expression soured, a mixture of turmoil, anger, and something else that Yoongi couldn't decipher. "I'm pregnant," Jimin spat furiously, adrenaline allowing him to finally wrench himself free. "You win. Now everybody knows. Happy now?" he hissed, storming from the room and thundering up the stairs, with his final word an angry "fuck" as he slammed his bedroom door behind himself. Yoongi couldn't move, frozen in place on the sofa with his hand still hovering above his own knee. Pregnant? How? Well, of course he knew how, but when? And with who? "What the hell just happened?" Namjoon demanded, rounding the sofa to stare at Yoongi. Taeyang started off the sofa, but Jungkook caught his arm, shaking his head. Taeyang's eyes shifted to the doorway and lingered for a moment before he settled back down, allowing Jungkook's hand to lace with his own. Seokjin followed Namjoon round to face the others, letting out a long breath. "I think we all need to agree that bombshell does not get brought up again unless Jimin is the one to do it." Shame sparked in Yoongi, and he felt it deep in the pit of his stomach. Shame that he hadn't let the matter alone, shame of hurting, no, betraying Jimin. But above all, shame that he was just sat there completely muted, knowing it was his fault and he had no idea how he was going to fix it. And he needed to fix it. Fast. One by one the others around him tiptoed off to their rooms with quiet mumbles of good night as they retreated, until only Yoongi and Hoseok remained. The silence hung heavy between them for several long minutes as they waited for each of the bedroom doors to close on the floor above them. "Did you know?" Hoseok asked gently, watching intently as Yoongi only shook his head, no longer trusting in his own voice. Hoseok nodded his understanding, resting a hand on Yoongi's knee for a moment before getting up. "It would have come out eventually. He'll forgive you. He always does." And it was true. Jimin never stayed mad at anyone for very long, but as Yoongi heard Hoseok pad away down the hall and off up the stairs to his room, only one thought settled in his mind. That was before. This time wasn't some petty squabble over who won a game or what to have for dinner. This wasn't teasing that got a little too mean. This was something real, and that look in Jimin's eyes that he couldn't read earlier was suddenly blindingly obvious. Pure, unadulterated hatred for what he had done.